biology. I want you to look through the slides. Think about the topics we've had. Which ones do you think you need to review? Put a check mark on those in the study guide that you think are areas you need to review. You weren't quite sure on the answer or what to do. You had to make extra adjustments to your notes. Put a check mark by those to let me and yourself know that those are topics you need to spend a little bit more time on. All right, so we can look at these interactions of the ecosystem. Remember, we talked about defining populations, communities, and individuals for each. We have the examples on the board. Individual is one frog. A population is a colony or army of frogs, as they are called. There can be both. And then a community would be all those things in a pond. So we need to look at the limiting factors and what will limit a population. Anything that prevents a population from growing or keeps it in check is a limiting factor. Some examples we talked about were food availability, the habitat, predators, disease, temperature. There might be some other things that you could list too. Abiotic factors versus biotic factors, and 3 examples of each. Biotic is living things. Abiotic is non-living things. What are some of those living things? Oh, maybe it's a predator, a bird, or a bug. If it's a non-living thing, it might be something like rain or sunlight, water quality, soil types. There's a lot of things you could list for these. An ecosystem is a community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. That means abiotic and biotic factors. When we move out to the next level and look at the biomes, what we're looking at is we're including now the climate, the temperature and the precipitation, along with what types of plant and animals generally live in this area. We talked about land biomes and water biomes. So we have terrestrial biomes and we have aquatic biomes, and you can see some of those listed on the board. We talked about them in class. There was also some links in your content to preview some more about them. We know that the largest biome is the marine biome. Biodiversity, and what happens if the diversity in a community or an ecosystem increases and decreases, is a pretty important topic in biology and the world around us. So we're looking at different kinds of species and the total number of individuals in each species that are living in a defined area. It's a really important indicator of how healthy and stable the ecosystem is. We also know that if there's milder temperatures and plenty of rainfall, there's usually greater diversity than an area that is colder with less rain. Scientists sometimes will go out and measure an area and look at the variety of species, and they know if they come back after so many years there's more species, then we have more diversity. If the number decreases, then we have a loss of biodiversity, and they want to investigate and determine what is causing that loss of biodiversity. Why do they do this? Why do they care that there's diversity? Well, diversity is what keeps our ecosystem in balance. We need to share roles to help maintain that balance. If there is only one species that performs a function in an ecosystem, there's a lot of pressure on that species to carry out the function in an ecosystem. If an ecosystem has a problem where it loses some of those species, then you can develop or create keystone species, meaning that if that species is removed, it will really affect the food web, and the food web can break down, which can cause a breakdown of the entire ecosystem. So that diversity is used to protect the ecosystem. When a species is removed or increased in an area, that can cause the food web to have increasing and decreasing populations, which will really affect it. We talked about those examples in class about the wolves and the sea otters, so review that. Go ahead and create a food chain using the sun and 4 different organisms. Make sure you include that energy flow. Remember that each level gets less energy as you move up the food chain. Do you remember how a food web is different from a food chain? You can create a food web too. So you can include that in your notes. Here's an example of one. Remember that a food chain is one pathway in which the energy flows from one trophic level to a next, where a food web has a combination of all the food chains within an ecosystem. You can see that only 10% passes from one level to the next. Can you find each of those primary consumers? Can you label them? Okay, so what is wrong with this food web? Look at it. Think, what's wrong with it? Look, did you notice? Look at the arrows. Now look at the arrows. So remember, when we're using our food webs, we're going from the producer up. We're using those pyramids to help us, the food trophic level pyramids. And we've identified each of the different levels, the producer, consumers that are primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. Okay, and where do those decomposers fit in? Which trophic level? And can you give me a couple examples? Well, we discussed that decomposers are found in all of the levels of the ecosystem. They break down and recycle organic material and turn it into usable nutrients. We can find them in the primary producer trophic level because plants die and their tissues are broken down by the decomposers. We can also find decomposers in the primary consumers trophic level, such as a rabbit dies, and the decomposers will break down the rabbit. Same with the secondary or even tertiary and quaternary level. There are decomposers in every level breaking down the dead organisms that are there to recycle them for use. Well, this is a review of what we've covered so far and looking at the interactions in the ecosystem. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. I hope you have a great day. The attendance code for lesson 509 is on the board.